Hi, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of smart contracts, how they affect all of us, and how they can change the way society will properly function. I think the first point we need to get on the same page about is what is a contract? Contract is a way for people to come to agreement that they'll actually follow through on. So contracts throughout history have been how people formalize and memorialize their commitments to each other to collaborate on something. And everything you see in front of you is largely a result of collaboration, other than the natural setting of trees and rocks and rivers and oceans and things like that. So human collaboration is underpinned by contracts because contracts give the reliability that humans need to actually collaborate. If we couldn't have contracts for whatever reason, it's not clear to me that we'd be able to engage in all the high-cost collaborations that create all the things you see in front of you, the chair, the desk, the computer. All of these are the results of hundreds of contracts. Contracts really come into life through something called the social contract. Here you see the signing of something called the Mayflower Compact, which is a social contract between all the initial settlers of the New World. So the Americas, when the Americas got settled, at least the Northern American portion, you had the Pilgrims, which came over on the Mayflower and a few other ships, and they had the ability for their own preservation to create an agreement about how they would preserve each other, how they would preserve their society, and at a basic level, how their society would function. And this is very, very important because it seems like both logic and science agree with the extreme necessity of this. Logic, and in this case philosophy, defines it as where no law, the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And like many things in philosophy, and even especially analytical philosophy, you start to see claims. But here, with this claim, we see the science proving it out through something called the Preston curve, which shows us the rate at which people live and die. So the time that people have available to them for existence, at least conscious existence in this form, on the basis of how much resources a society gives them per person. And what we see is that societies where people can't seem to come to agreement, or societies that can't function to provide a certain level of resources to people, have extremely low life expectancy, 40 and lower. Prehistoric man, because he couldn't form the type of collaborations and associations that we can form with each other, had a life expectancy of something like 30 years. And this is something that is pretty much accepted as necessary for our society to function properly. The existence of a contract called the social contract, which takes us out of a more scarier form of existence called the state of nature, which I don't have enough time to go into, but essentially is the place where life expectancy doesn't take people past their 40s or 50s. And this is a very significant point because the very basis of us continuing to live is founded on the existence of a certain contract. The more detailed and the second type of contract that really underpins what we have and what we can do with our free time are commercial agreements. Commercial agreements define the specifics of how people collaborate, how they relate to each other, how they have shared goals, and how those shared goals result in benefits that they then share among themselves, which is very important because if somebody's going to spend their entire life researching something or doing something or exploring to a certain direction, they need certain assurances that that time will be well spent. Thankfully for us, commercial agreements have evolved to the point where you had people like the Company of Merchant Adventurers who actually gave the money to the pilgrims on the Mayflower for them to sail and settle the New World. It put them in heavy debt, and it created a certain relationship between them and the Company of Merchant Adventurers. But at the end of the day, it enabled them to sail across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World and form a new social contract for that new world in the form of the Mayflower Compact. These agreements in the past, or at least during the time of the Mayflower and some time after, were done in various forums, marketplaces, agoras. In this case, you see a rendition of Lloyd's Coffee House, and you see people coming and reading, coming to agreement, reading certain agreements. In the modern world, the place that people come to agreement is now the internet. That's the place where the most agreements, both by the amount of agreements and the value of those agreements, are created, agreed to, and finalized, and then seen through to completion. So the internet is now the new place where people come to agreements like they did before at Lloyd's Coffee House or the merchant hall of the merchant adventurers. Commercial agreements have obviously evolved over the years. They've evolved in both what they can allow people to do, how they can allow people to engage in various cooperation, and in how they are maintained. And all of these things are interrelated as well. So you can start thousands of years ago, up to 5,000 or even more years ago, with stone records of sale and ownership rights. Then you move on to various types of contracts, such as employment and the guarantee of certain services or certain guarantees of quality on mediums like papyrus. You then see the rise of debt, and debt in many cases took its most extreme form in the Roman Empire, at least in certain more ancient cultures, and that was maintained on wood medium. Then you arrived at paper, and in paper you see a momentous document here, which is the first corporation, the East India Company. And the creation of corporations is then credited with starting off the Industrial Revolution, which allows all of us to have massive amounts of goods, an extension in our life expectancy, and actually a lot of leisure time to pursue our personal interests, academic interests, scientific interests, and once again move society forward. So commercial agreements have evolved in what they allow people to do, as well as in the manner in which they are recorded and kept, which once again gave people greater and greater surety that the agreement actually had force, and gave them greater and greater reason to engage in the behavior within that agreement. For example, the East India Company was enabled by the royal court, and so it had very strong standing, and people had very strong belief in that if they put effort and resources into the East India Company, they would indeed receive back what was owed to them. We also see that societies that have functioning systems of contracts, like the Roman Republic, see much greater rates of production, basically. Production of various metals, production of various resources that end up going on to allow people to forget their basic needs that are now taken care of and focus on the more interesting parts of human existence: art, poetry, science. All of those things are enabled because people now have time to engage in them. And they have time to engage in them because a system of contract somewhere enabled someone to, for their own interests, arrive at agreements with other people for their interests, generate security, generate food, generate shelter, generate all the things that people need to save them the time to engage in all those things we all care about and have come to define human existence, like art, music, poetry, philosophy, science. So it's all quite connected. And in fact, in periods where their system of contract is not stable and there is not a reliable way for people to arrive at agreement, you see something literally called the Dark Ages, where production plummets and all the things that we care about defining us as human beings also plummet. Art, poetry, philosophy go hand in hand, lockstep almost, with the ability for people to have security, shelter, food available to them in abundance, and to have an excess of time to engage in these more interesting things. Then you see the rise of corporations, you see the Industrial Revolution, and you once again see a number of people engaging in all kinds of activities that we all find very worthwhile. The evolution of contracts in the current environment is something that's not surprisingly focused on technology and the evolution of information technology as far back as the telegraph. Even as far back as the telegraph, you had enforceable agreements that were recorded on this medium of a telegraph, and people could very quickly agree on things over huge distances. They could have it memorialized in a telegraph tape that then was considered legally binding in many states and many jurisdictions. You then moved on to telex machines. Before the internet, you had the telecommunications network, and interestingly enough, you can still see a ticker tape for recording certain data there, and a rotary phone. So as the global infrastructure evolved, the system by which people communicated and came to agreement and memorialized agreements also evolved, which accelerated the speed of how they were able to interact and work with each other, and the speed at which they were able to achieve globalization and various other benefits of globalization. Then you saw digital agreements come into use, And those are what underpin a lot of your daily life. So if you think about the Uber car that comes to get you, or the goods that are delivered to your house from Amazon, or even the content you might read on the internet, which is supported by advertising that needs to be tracked in order for advertisers to pay content producers to make the content that you consume. All of that is managed by digital agreements, internet-based digital agreements that come to define a lot of our lives. They come to define whether we can get a certain service, at what rate we can get that service, and how soon and at what quality other services will be made available to both us and, very importantly, people in other emerging markets where that service could completely redefine their life. Now, the reason that smart contracts and blockchains are of particular significance is because they are the next evolution of contracts. And as we've briefly seen, contracts are important both in what they can do and in the medium in which they are recorded and stored, because the medium provides assurances to the participants in those contracts that the contract will indeed be fulfilled. And therefore, they have a reason to contribute their resources and time and energy and employment to that shared enterprise. This is where smart contracts are really the pinnacle of contracts in general. And we'll go into that right about now. So the first thing I think that's important is to understand what digital agreements seek to achieve. And what they seek to achieve is an automation between participants and performance data, right? Participants are people with a mobile phone or a computer, an internet connection, and they're basically saying, I want a service, I want some content delivered and an advertiser to be paid, I want some goods delivered to me. And then there's performance data, which is just data out there in the internet from various other systems, the GPS of the Uber car, delivery of the goods, that the content was loaded up on your browser. All of these come into the category of performance data. And then what digital agreements are supposed to do is they're supposed to automate the relationship between participants and all the performance data, whether that's data generated by their participant or by data generated from outside of the participant's control. And it's a fantastic thing, and it's revolutionized and completely changed how many of us live our lives. We don't have to go to stores. We can order things. People can drive us places. We can get all kinds of information because other people are willing to pay for it through advertising. It's a fascinating, amazing world we live in, which I think we should all be extremely grateful for. And this world that digital agreements have given us can now also see a step function increase in what we can expect from it. The reason that increase and improvement really happens is that as great as centrally run digital agreements are, they have a fatal flaw in that they are not something that can align the interests of the participants. So there's a fundamental flaw where the people running these contracts have an asymmetric, extreme level of control over them, which some people may have experienced when an insurance policy wasn't paid for them, or a refund wasn't given to them, or somebody generated content but wasn't paid for it, because somebody who runs the contract, who actually runs the contract code, decided to take a different path from what was in that code. And this tampering is a fundamental conflict of interest where the participants, which may be performing all their roles correctly, have another participant, which is the operator of this digital agreement, who does not have to perform their role correctly because they operate the contract. They control the system that is going to be directing the proper payout and assessment of the contract. The second huge conflict of interest is that these environments that are run by large for-profit entities fundamentally have a for-profit motive where their goal is a monopoly over their relationship with participants. Because they control the operation of this contract, they control all the inclusion of participants, they control all the inclusion of data, and this eventually results in at least monopoly pricing and rent, and at worst, stagnation, lack of competition, lack of new features for participants and users, and them being forced to use those other systems. Conversely, smart contracts and blockchains are tamper-proof. That is one of the main words that I would use to describe them, is that they seek to give you this automation of a digital agreement, but with a tamper-proof property. And the tamper-proof property is quite important because now the participants know that regardless of the power dynamics that they might have between each other or between the person who even made the contract, there is no way that their participation can be gamed. Such that if you're a small supplier of goods on the other side of the world, and there's a big purchaser of goods, before you would have serious doubts about whether that large purchaser would send you a contract, and they would not pay you, and they could do it because they're large and they have lawyers and 50 other reasons, which is the case in many situations that we don't even think about. But now you could have a piece of code running in a network of computers outside the control of a large purchaser or a government or any other participant. And as long as you fulfilled your obligations according to the contract, you would be correctly, fairly, and in a timely manner given what you're owed. And this parallel system of contracts to what we're used to is a momentous, unique point in history where people can now have agreements that none of them can exert asymmetric power dynamics over. And never in the history of agreements did you have contracts where the bigger participant or the much larger participant couldn't get out of it or modify it or go to the person running the contract and tell them not to pay you. And this will, in my opinion, change the way that people interact with each other. Now, one brief example of this is something called insurance. Insurance is the payout of a policy that an insurance policyholder pays a premium for to eliminate risk. So the insurance policyholder says, I see a big risk. The risk could completely upend my existence, make me a not productive member of society. I want to eliminate this risk. I am willing to pay money on a monthly or yearly basis to eliminate this risk, as long as somebody will provide me a guarantee that that risk is eliminated so I can continue being a productive member of society that pursues my economic destiny the way I want. Amazingly, in many parts of the world, if you do something as basic as farming, you can't get an insurance agreement for lack of rainfall, which is a fundamental risk for farming in many parts of the world. Because you can't get insurance against lack of rainfall, after 1 or 2 seasons, which is probably going to be more likely with increased climate change dynamics, you find yourself to be a migrant, displaced, unable to pursue your economic destiny, and in a situation which neither you nor the larger global economy wanted, simply because the local system of contracts was unable to provide you with the guarantees that you needed to continue to pursue your economic destiny. What we are all really talking about when we talk about blockchains and smart contracts is various forms of technologically enforced agreements that create a parallel legal system, which is not dependent on corrupt people-driven dynamics. And never in history has there been a system that can properly allow people to agree that could not be corrupted by people. And that is extremely significant for both the developed markets that have huge systemic financial risk that is consistently manipulated by people, small groups of people, to their benefit and to the detriment of larger society, and very importantly, to the people in the emerging market, which don't have a local legal infrastructure that can provide a certain agreement to them, but do have all the ability, desire, appetite for risk, and even in many cases, resources to come together and engage in the collaborations that would come to change their lives and the lives of those around them. So if you're ever wondering why blockchains or smart contracts matter, they matter because they change the way the world works in a way that changes your life and my life and the lives of billions of other people. Now we're going to switch to looking at what are the issues that we, as the very lucky few who can work on technological innovation, need to do. What do we need to do to get the world to this place? We focus, our team, Chainlink, focuses on a specific problem called the Oracle problem. There's a few other technical challenges. There's always technical challenges to solve, always things to improve in AI, the traditional internet, all kinds of things. But we are going to focus here on the Oracle problem. The Oracle problem is essentially a barrier to the degree of automation that a digital agreement on a blockchain can do, called a smart contract. So smart contracts really should probably be called something like tamper-proof digital agreements. But they're called smart, and that's great, that's fine. But really, they are extremely reliable containers and environments to run contract code that are seeking to be entirely tamper-proof and entirely beyond the control of any single party. And this is their unique property, and it's a fascinating unique property, and it's something I'm unbelievably excited about and grateful for people generating. But the reality is that this property precludes their connectivity to all the data that they need to know to be used for insurance, to be used for global trade, to be used for financial products, because all of those contracts are defined by external information about rain, about delivery, about the market. And this limitation has driven our industry to be defined by tokens. And tokens are good. Tokens have accelerated our industry from just Bitcoin into somewhere that people can make a smart contract to define value transfer, and put value onto these systems. And I think that value will be used in these more advanced smart contracts. But I think more importantly, it's maybe time for our industry to evolve into a bigger share of digital agreements and to get on the path to be the dominant form of digital agreement, because that is what will help redefine society in the way we previously spoke about. It is when smart contracts are the ubiquitous and dominant form of digital agreement that we will see the change that they can really bring to all of us. This transition is underpinned by the types of contracts that smart contracts can be written about. You can't really write an automated agreement if it doesn't know the thing about which it's supposed to be automated. And once we deliver data, then I think we'll see a huge growth in what our industry is about. We will see a larger percentage of contracts about real events rather than ownership transfer and token generation. But token generation as an activity will grow, value secured in tokens will grow, and usage of tokens will also grow. So it's really a win-win, and more than anything, an evolution of our industry. Now, I've seen a few evolutions of our industry in the 7+ years I've been building smart contracts, and so that's where part of my surety about this comes from. The first evolution I saw is Bitcoin multi-signature, where you had a smart contract only in the form of Bitcoins being signed by multiple parties. And as exciting as that is, it is a very limited set of capabilities. I really got into this space and started building a lot when you saw protocol smart contracts appear, when you could make new smart contracts by getting them into a piece of software known as a protocol. And that took months, took 6 months, a year. It was horrible. You had to take months or even a year to get a new type of smart contract live. I mean, that wasn't going to go anywhere, even though you had these amazing tamper-proof properties and people still use them. The next shift that I saw was protocol smart contracts becoming scriptable, for which Ethereum deserves a lot of credit, because it took us from a model where you had to spend months getting a new contract into a protocol to somewhere where in a day you could sit down, write some code, and you had a contract. Once again, the issue was that even though that's a huge leap forward and it generated this massive boom in tokenization, and that's a good thing because it added a lot of more value into blockchains and gave us a first initial concrete use case, much like the internet gave an initial use case for sending documents around universities, or certain versions of unencrypted email was the initial version of the internet's value. Tokens are the initial version of the blockchain's value. So I'm very grateful that that happened. But that's what you can generate. That's the data and the contract you can write today. I think going beyond that into a world where you could now write contracts using scriptable smart contracts like Solidity, and connecting that contract to all the extremely important real world events related to delivery of goods, fulfillment of obligations for people who create content and pay for ads, global trade, insurance, is really the next step in the evolution of this space. We are already starting to see it in certain sectors of smart contracts. For example, decentralized finance is the creation of financial products that are truly secure end-to-end because they use an Oracle and they need to be secure end-to-end because they use an Oracle and they use a smart contract platform. This shift is driven by many great companies like Synthetic, Aave, BZX, Nexus Mutual, many great others that use an Oracle mechanism that allows them to launch new markets and provide all these useful capabilities. I think the important thing to understand about this shift in DeFi or any future shift in other verticals is that if you're not talking about making a token or generating a contract for ownership for some on-chain asset, you're talking about a contract that exists in two equal parts. One is on-chain, which is the contract code defining the conditions. The other is off-chain. And the off-chain part is unfortunately not always as secure as it should be because it's connected to insecure systems, much like the contract is often connected to private keys. So one way to think about it is that the security of your smart contract depends on the security that the private keys exhibit, and the security of the data going into that smart contract is another critical component because it controls it. Many contracts are entirely controlled by external systems, which don't meet the same tamper-proof or reliability or security guarantees of the contract's on-chain realization. And so you need a system that's going to assure and validate and ensure that whatever is triggering the contract is meeting the same high level of reliability, tamper-proofness, and security standards as the contract. And that's really the goal of the body of work that we work on. We achieve this by enabling a general purpose Oracle mechanism that is expandable to any input, any output that needs to go into a blockchain network, and that seeks to provide extremely high levels of security and reliability for the end-to-end security of that digital agreement, of that smart contract, because it is the end-to-end security that anybody will care about. Nobody will rely on a contract that succeeds to a point and then massively fails. People will rely on a new form of technologically enforced contracts and agreement once it provides that tamper-proofness end-to-end. And this is really the goal of smart contract developers building more advanced next-generation smart contracts, is how do I properly build this end-to-end security for my next-generation contract, right? How do I really arrive at that reliability in both the contract code and its relationship to all the systems that need to function properly for the contract to provide its full value? We achieve this through a few fundamental tenets and principles that we've already implemented and are continuing to implement. I'll go through them briefly and then we'll cover some in detail. The first one is decentralization. This is the ability for an independent set of nodes and network of nodes to perform the computation that defines the security of an oracle. So the security of the oracle is defined by an independent group of nodes, providing a validation and assuring that data is accurate, is the source of the data where it should be coming from, and is meeting whatever other dynamics that it needs to meet. We also focus very heavily on the security of individual nodes in that network. We believe that there's a balance between decentralization and node quality that needs to be configurable by users, and there needs to be a system that gives them the capacity for the decentralization and the node quality that they want in proportion to their security assumptions, which will vary on a use case by use case basis. It is perhaps very relevant to note that oracles deal with a multitude of use cases in as far as there's all types of contracts in various verticals with various conditions, various security requirements, various data requirements, whereas blockchains deal with the generation of blocks and transactions in a very specific subset of opcodes or certain VM capabilities. Likewise, because data is really the nature of the Oracle problem, and the data delivery of accurate information to a contract, we focus on data quality very heavily in our system and in our principles for building. Some people ignore data quality and say, hey, data quality is all the same. I think it's a huge mistake, and we spend a lot of time on ensuring that data quality is at a high level, and also making sure that there are systems to continually provide more and more insight about the quality of data. One thing that we do is we enable the quality of data through cryptoeconomic security. So we focus on how do we make a data delivery mechanism that can be secured not only by various cryptographic approaches, but also by the incentives that guarantee or to a certain degree provide assurance that data will not only be delivered from the right source, but in the right way, at the right time, at the right frequency, and with all the other data delivery requirements that there might be. We practice something called defense in depth, which means that we make sure to layer on multiple security approaches. And layering on multiple security approaches doesn't mean that one subsumes the other. It means that decentralization is a core fundamental tenet of security that we believe in, but people want to combine that in many cases with trusted execution environments and zero knowledge proofs. And they should be able to do that to meet the specific requirements of their smart contracts and so end-to-end security. Because it is really the developers of these smart contracts that know the security assumptions they want to implement, know the data quality that they need for their contract to function at different levels of value. And there needs to be a flexible system which will give them all the tools in whatever configuration they feel is best, and that can scale as the value secured by their system scales. We believe very heavily in open source and the immune system that a piece of software arrives at once it's built open source, together with a security research and security audit community that's worthwhile, which we're very lucky to have and be a part of. We also believe that, and have already seen many blockchains wanting to devote more integration resources towards integrating Chainlink into their environment, because it is open source and because they know that it is something that will always be available to them. It is a worthwhile thing for them to integrate, because they are making an investment in a blockchain middleware that will always be there to transport data to them. That is something that we ourselves cannot create some kind of monopoly on or extract monopoly rents or prices. And so we believe in open source. We believe in working heavily with the security research and audit community. And we also believe that smart contracts on any environment should be able to have access to all of this data and all of these inputs and outputs. And that's something we're also heavily working towards, because the bigger a universe we have of smart contracts, the more of a universe data providers and other API providers have to provide their data. And so that makes them more likely to provide data to all of those individual universes, because they now have a larger market into which they can provide that information and data collectively, which is another dynamic I'll be speaking about in a few minutes. Now that we've briefly covered some of the tenets, I think it's also useful to look at what is the nature of the problem that we're seeking to solve. And there's a few nuances to it, but we'll essentially cover 2 or 3 parts in this presentation. The first problem is pretty direct, and it at this point has become relatively obvious to certain smart contract developers that are more experienced. It's that you don't want a single source of failure. You don't want a single place that people can tamper with and control your contract from, because that is not the model of decentralized computation, which underpins the security of your smart contract. So if you want to retain the decentralized security assumption and model, you want to eliminate that single point of failure. And because your contract is now built in both a computational format and a middleware and external data source format, you need to consider this new surface area. This new surface area is what we specialize in. It's what we've successfully secured for hundreds of millions in value, and hundreds of millions more in value very soon. We focus on creating a decentralized computational resource that is not a chain. It does not make a blockchain. It does not run smart contracts. It validates and assures the reliability of the relationship between data and contracts in various environments. And the assurance of that relationship is what allows people to expand the features of their contract, while very importantly maintaining the security and end-to-end reliability and tamper-proofness of that contract. And this is what we do at a fundamental level with decentralization in a decentralized computational environment called the Decentralized Oracle Network. It's a relatively straightforward solution. It's working now. You can see it in various places like feeds.chain.link and various other environments where people have composed Oracle networks to properly validate inputs into their contracts using decentralized computation through a decentralized Oracle network. The next dynamic that we focused on and that we architected from the beginning into our system from day one is data quality. And data quality is once again very important because garbage in, garbage out. If you don't provide high quality data that can be relied on to a contract that is controlled and essentially driven by that data, then that contract will be unable to provide the assurances that it seeks to provide to the contract creator, and even more importantly, to the contract creator's users. And this is why assuring data quality and that data is something that the contract will both receive and receive at a high level of quality is an extremely important and a fundamentally different problem from the operation of a blockchain network. And it is the problem that we've spent a lot of time and resources on approaching in an educated, well-informed, well-architected manner. Once again, the way to examine this issue is how do we not want to approach this issue? We don't want to approach this issue by, first of all, not including premium data. In the world of data, there is free data and there is trial data, and then there is paid for data. Paid for data is what people use for high value digital agreements that control large amounts of value. If you don't have premium data in more advanced digital agreement industries, you won't trigger a contract because it's outside the realm of the reasonable to say I'm going to use trial plan or free data to trigger a $100 million agreement when that trial plan or free data has no guarantees about its quality or its availability or anything else. So the first issue that people want to avoid is the issue where there's a node that can't access premium data or doesn't have access to premium data for whatever reason. I've unfortunately seen some people building Oracle mechanisms that cannot access a premium paid API. That is something that has not been architected into their system, and it precludes them from accessing the type of data that could actually be used for a high value contract, such that even if somebody builds an MVP or something with their system, when the chips are down and people decide whether they want to trigger large amounts of value with an Oracle mechanism that is consuming free or trial plan data, I imagine that the majority of responsible people will say that no, they in fact need high quality premium data. They also need, if they think about it in a deeper dimension, they need an assurance from the node operator, from the data delivery mechanism that has access to the data, that the data will actually be delivered. Because if they don't have that assurance, then even if it's connected to a high quality data source, you arrive at a place where you're not assured that the data will be delivered. You just know that the node operator or the middleware has access to data. But how are you assured that the data will actually be delivered? And what are the consequences and the incentives to make sure that the data is delivered? This is another place where we have architected from the very first day of our system's inception. And we have decided that not only will our system excel at storing credentials or passwords for accessing premium data in a secure, tamper-proof manner, but also it will excel at providing guarantees that once a node or an Oracle network is connected to a set of data sources, it is then able to provide assurances to the contract creator and even more importantly to the contract creator's users that that data will be delivered. This happens through something called on-chain service agreements. It's essentially the use of a smart contract or the blockchain infrastructure in which the contract is operating to create an on-chain smart contract and a guarantee that data will be properly delivered over a certain time period, at a certain level of quality, at a certain frequency, and within any other set of dimensions that smart contract developers want to define. And it is really the definition of these various dimensions that comes to define an Oracle mechanism that can properly cater to the unique properties of every smart contract that might come into existence, that needs to secure large amounts of value, growing amounts of value, and that needs assurances that not only is the Oracle mechanism able to scale on a decentralized basis, it's able to scale on all the other security properties that that smart contract needs, as well as the quality of data, and that's all something that can get memorialized and made enforceable using the same system that the smart contract relies on in the guarantees that it gives to users. And now users can trace the end-to-end security and the end-to-end guarantees and the end-to-end reliability of a smart contract which is what will come to define its actual reliability for them and whether they end up putting hundreds of millions, billions of dollars into that specific contract. One of the dimensions that a well-functioning on-chain service agreement framework enables is the ability to attach deposits or stake or economic incentives to the proper execution of those agreements. And it is this dimension of cryptoeconomic security which is also an important part of our system, albeit not the only part. Once again, smart contract developers, partly based on their users' preferences, should be able to configure the security dynamics between them and various external systems on the basis of decentralization, hardware, zero-knowledge proof, and other cryptographic techniques, and cryptoeconomic security. So cryptoeconomic security is something that I'm going to jump into now and talk through some of the concepts there that are not always as clean-cut and simple because it's a partly new field, partly evolving field. The first dynamic around cryptoeconomic security from staking is a dynamic that I have always, at least myself internally, called implicit staking. Implicit staking is one of the dynamics that has successfully secured Bitcoin and other blockchain networks that might not actually have people lose value if they deviate from the proper operation of a protocol as a miner, but it does relate to that miner knowing, as a rational economic actor, that if they deviate from the proper operation of the protocol, and if they have large amounts of Bitcoin or large amounts of mining equipment, which is essentially future Bitcoin, that Bitcoin and that mining equipment, which is future Bitcoin, will lose value. This is what I consider to be implicit staking, where the node operator or the participant in the protocol knows that if they deviate, the value of an asset will drop, and it may drop very low, may drop to zero if they and enough others deviate. And this implicit staking, I think, has created a lot of security and created a lot of proper dynamics between protocol participants in various blockchains that might not have staking enabled, but I think it proves out to a large degree the economic rationale behind the fact that you have an asset, you don't want the asset to depreciate in value, therefore you will participate in a protocol properly. Then there's something called explicit staking, or at least what I consider explicit staking, where you have specific conditions under which a single participant in the blockchain infrastructure would lose a very specific set number of assets, usually in the form of tokens, if they deviate, right? So I'm a miner, I participate in a network. If I deviate in a certain fashion, I lose a very specific number of tokens. Therefore, I have a very clear relationship between my proper operation of the protocol and what I would lose as somebody that deviated, right? Now, this is fine, and this is great. This is fascinating, and I think it's great that all these new advances in how blockchain networks and smart contracts operate are happening, and I'm a big, big fan of them because I think there is a lot of innovation and a lot of things that can happen to improve the way that blockchain networks function in various ways, and I'm very excited by that because it's, once again, blockchain networks also need to evolve and reach all kinds of new capabilities for us to reach that world of smart contracts, changing the way society functions. But the reality is that this form of staking is right now used for generating blocks. It's used for generating blocks that secure transactions in a blockchain network, a smart contract network filled with transactions about various token transfers or smart contract code. I just want to clarify that even though this is an explicit form of staking, and it is people staking against the operation of a blockchain infrastructure, it is them staking against the generation of blocks and not the delivery of data. There are many people who can copy paste a blockchain network, generate some kind of staking system, and have a smart contract network that is generating blocks and securing transactions. And I think there's a lot of interesting work there and a lot of great people doing that. I really do. But I just want to highlight the difference between the types of explicit staking that exists. Explicit staking for generating blocks and making a smart contract network does not generate data delivery guarantees. It only generates blocks because that is what that stake is about. Conversely, in our system, because we have service agreements and because our system is architected from day one for proper data delivery, our explicit staking focuses on the proper fulfillment of a service agreement and its conditions to assure users and creators of smart contracts that their relationship with data and with external systems will be properly incentivized, such that even if you have an external decentralized computational environment like an Oracle network, computing and validating data into a system like a smart contract network, you now also have a guarantee for a specific contract's requirements and a specific user group's security needs, that the delivery of data will generate a certain amount of user fees to the node operators delivering that data, and they will in turn provide certain security guarantees about how many node operators, the quality of the node operators, the hardware of the node operators, the cryptographic techniques used by the node operators. And in this case, the cryptoeconomic guarantees the deposit put in a state of lockdown for assurances that the data will be delivered properly, right? Now, this is also highlighted by what happens when a service agreement in our system releases stake. In proof of stake systems where the staking often goes to networks or it's burned or something else happens to it, in our case, many of the service agreements will likely go to the smart contract developers, and in some cases might even be given to users, because the service agreement is meant to guarantee a very specific outcome around data delivery to a specific contract under the extremely specific conditions defined in the service agreement. So once again, we're focused on data delivery, highly secure systems for data delivery. There are many forms of stake. Our systems I consider having explicit stake and implicit stake, where node operators might have a certain amount of link and they might stake another certain amount of link for specific contracts. And our goal is really to make sure that the data delivery mechanism, in addition to the quality of data, is properly functioning for the end-to-end security of a contract to be guaranteed end-to-end. So that is the goal of our method of staking, our explicit staking assumptions, and how we're approaching it. This fits into our entire framework and how we've architected it from day one. And once again, it focuses on data quality and the proper staking of value against data delivery. All of this really creates a few cycles. I'm going to briefly now jump into some of the cycles and the key dynamics around those cycles that this creates. One of the first cycles is that smart contracts end up paying user fees. Those user fees are paid into pools for specific Oracle networks. So as specific Oracle networks delivering specific individual pieces of data to certain smart contracts on various environments begin to get more smart contracts paying fees for that data, the amount of fees grows, and that surplus in fees eventually leads to an improvement of that Oracle network, eventually leads to more stake from the nodes in that network, eventually leads to more security guarantees in the case of better hardware, or more costly cryptographic techniques used in existing hardware. And it is really the relationship between user fees and the node operators and the growth of smart contracts to generate more user fees, which is one of the key cycles that we are getting underway successfully now. Now, when user fees reach a certain level on a specific network by network basis, we will then see a need to properly assign user fees to the improvement of that network. The initial categories of what a governance structure could look like for an Oracle network is the amount of nodes, the quality of nodes, the quality of data, and that includes the frequency of updates and the various service agreements that this network seeks to guarantee. So I think there is a very productive, virtuous cycle between more smart contracts generating greater amounts of fees, those greater amounts of fees leading to a larger pool of fees for node operators to seek, that greater pool of fees then enabling those node operators to spend more money on security in various forms. Better hardware, better cryptographic techniques, more nodes in an Oracle network, cryptoeconomic security from explicitly staking against a service agreement. All of these are dimensions which will once again vary by Oracle network, because the Oracle networks need to be flexible in serving the needs of specific contracts and specific verticals of contracts, such that the service agreements will be different based on the contracts that use different Oracle networks. This first virtuous cycle is something that we're seeing come underway now, and we're already seeing node operators proactively thinking about, how do I become a more secure, more attractive node operators to be included in more Oracle networks, to get a greater share of fees, to then build my performance history, have more money to expend on greater security. And with the greater security comes the ability to provide more end-to-end security guarantees for larger amounts of value. Larger amounts of value then come to define our space. More value in smart contracts makes more things like DeFi more attractive, more news, more interest from traditional players, fintechs, insurtechs, more crypto startups that have funding to pursue the opportunity in a space with more smart contract value, and the virtuous cycle continues. So it's an important virtuous cycle that we already see underway, and we're doing our best to accelerate in the right direction. The second virtuous cycle is the one around data, because as I said, the breadth of smart contracts that will come into existence is as big as the world of agreement is. And because digital agreements are now the preferred form of the way people conduct commerce in global industries or local industries or various sized industries, and because smart contracts can only be built about the data which they have access to, you now begin to see a cycle, and I've seen this for years, but we are now seeing this cycle accelerate, where you have a larger smart contract market, which creates more of a reason for data providers to provide data, which creates more data being available to smart contract developers, which I have personally seen create the creation of new markets, new user experiences for a greater sized market of smart contract users and a greater sized market of smart contract value, which then begins the cycle again, right? So you have a hard requirement where if you have an existing DeFi product or an existing insurance product, you need certain types of data to expand it, or you need certain types of data available in an end-to-end secure way to launch a product at all. And I've seen both. I've seen some of our users launch with us and arrive at over 100 million in value secured in less than a year, and they were able to launch and they were able to improve because they didn't have to build an Oracle mechanism. I've also seen some of our existing users successfully have over $100 million in value and be able to launch new markets very quickly to the benefit of their users, who then brought other users and expanded the size of the smart contract ecosystem and market in general, which is truly the beginning of our space's growth into the dominant form of digital agreement. These cycles, in addition to others, work together. So everything that seeks to provide more smart contracts value that is then driven by the value in those contracts forms a very positive, possibly virtuous cycle between all those dynamics. We right now, in addition to these two cycles, are working on a number of things, but these two cycles are really the things that I think are beginning to accelerate. And what we're seeing both the generation of more data, both in the variety of data and the quality of data being made available. We're seeing people build, we're seeing that create more usership, that creates greater value, larger market for data providers, and we're seeing more security from node operators being provided in order to get a greater share of the slowly growing initial pool of fees, which is growing. I'm very excited and truly thrilled to announce that we've arrived at a place within our own internal thinking about how a grants system should work for the acceleration of these two dynamics. Now, it's obviously a very complicated question about how you can properly incentivize and organize large groups of people to come together and build a great piece of open source software. But we're very, very grateful to see a number of ecosystem companies already building truly next generation tooling and capabilities into and around Chainlink. And in addition to supporting that, we now have a certain plan about how we're going to accelerate the growth of our ecosystem and how the Chainlink ecosystem is going to grow by including the academic research community, the larger crypto blockchain community, and various other communities that come to see this as a worthwhile problem that they want to help solve in open source collaborative manner. The first category is really going to be around making sure that high quality data makes its way into the Chainlink network. And as more data makes its way in there, more contracts get created, larger market, more data. But there needs to be people that spend time on making sure that data is put into the Chainlink network, higher quality data is put in, adapters are built, integrations happen with all the resources that the Chainlink network seeks to provide. Once those resources are integrated, you then switch to another set of concerns and hurdles, which is around developer tooling. So you need to develop all kinds of systems and capabilities and improvements to make sure that smart contracts and developers of smart contracts can more easily access this data, more efficiently include it into their applications, greater assurances for themselves that it's properly working, and essentially accelerate the development cycle, the speed at which smart contract developers can add all of this data into their application. And this is where new developer tools and Chainlink grants related to that are going to be focused. Then you also see a multitude of different environments that require this data, and all of those environments require thoughtful integration and thoughtful focus on how do we properly assure the relationship between the Chainlink network, the Chainlink node operators, and these various blockchain environments. Now, we have been doing a lot of that, and that's been going well, and we've been launching many new networks on a regular pace, both public and private variants. But the enormity of this is really something that would benefit from a larger open source effort, and we're also very glad to see that there's open source communities and specific blockchains and core developers and various people in those environments that want a middleware and want data available to the developers building in those systems. And so we're very excited to approach the integration of all these environments in a very thoughtful kind of community-centric way, in addition to the work that we're able to help with. This, once again, creates more environments for more smart contracts to operate in, creating a larger market, creating more demand for APIs and data providers to put their data and APIs into various blockchain environments. The next category is the category of reputation tools and the monitoring of Chainlink networks by node operators, by users. This is something that will seek to provide insight for users into whether a node operator is indeed reliable, which will then create that virtuous cycle between highly reliable node operators being chosen more often, getting more fees, having more fees to deploy towards more secure capabilities, providing more stake to get more fees. And the real dynamic here is around making sure that high quality node operators get more fees, medium quality node operators get the fees they deserve, and then there will be a multitude of other node operators which will be used in Chainlink networks that depend heavily on decentralization. And they depend heavily on a large multitude of unrelated node operators. But the goal is to really create a cycle between greater security, assuring more people that there is end-to-end security for their application, and then that creating more contract value, which creates more fees to pay for the security of that value, which then goes back into the Oracle networks that improve to continue that virtuous cycle. Right? So this is the initial key points of our grant program. I'm sure there'll be more details soon, and we'll have more evolutions and nuanced developments of how the grant program evolves. But the initial focus is on how do we properly make these cycles work in the proper speed and relationship with all the parties involved, which is obviously a multi-faceted group of different parties, but we've already started to see this move. We've already started to see node operators seek to spend to get more fees from better security. We've already seen more usage allow us to get more data providers into these environments. And I think that the addition of more blockchain environments is something that's only going to accelerate this because it creates more of a market for both data providers and node operators to gain fees from as the larger smart contract industry grows. If this body of work is something that's interesting to you and it seems like something that's worth working on, then we'd be very excited to speak with you. We're an extremely committed, direct group of people that are very excited to be working on something that we think is truly valuable within an idea meritocracy, where the best ideas do end up winning out, and where everybody's able to come together, work remotely on their own schedule in the way that enables them to get the best out of themselves while attaining truly great results and moving both our collective work and the whole blockchain industry forward. If that sounds good to you, then please talk to us. We are growing our team at the moment. And otherwise, I'd also like to say thank you very much to our wonderful community who's been so immensely supportive and helpful in us making sure that all the relevant people know about how truly important of a problem this is, as well as the node operators, developers, data providers, academic researchers, and all the other people that have contributed to making this a reality. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to speaking with many of you soon. Thank you.